The desert wind carried sand that felt like tiny needles against exposed skin. Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed herself against the crumbling wall of the abandoned building, her heart hammering against her ribs. The explosion had come from nowhere, turning what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering mission into a nightmare. She wasn't supposed to be here. Officially, she was just a civilian contractor working with the State Department. Her cover story was solid, a communications specialist helping to establish secure networks in the region. But the truth was far more complex. Sarah was actually a deep-cover operative for a classified government program, one that didn't officially exist in any Pentagon filing system. The mission had started 3 days ago. Intel suggested that a high-value target was meeting with local insurgent leaders in this remote village. Sarah's job was to get close enough to plant surveillance devices that would help track the target's movements. Her cover as a humanitarian worker had given her access to areas where soldiers couldn't go without raising suspicions. But something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. The local contact who was supposed to guide her to the safe house never showed up. Instead, she found herself caught in the middle of what appeared to be a coordinated ambush. Insurgents had surrounded the village, and now gunfire echoed through the narrow streets like deadly thunder. Sarah clutched her side where shrapnel from the explosion had torn through her jacket. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and sticky. She could feel the metal fragment lodged somewhere between her ribs, but moving made the pain shoot through her chest like lightning. Her radio crackled with static. She'd been trying to reach her handler for the past hour, but the signal was too weak. The communication blackout meant that officially, she didn't exist here. No one was coming to extract a civilian contractor who wasn't supposed to be in an active combat zone. That's when she heard them. Boots on gravel. Multiple sets, moving with the disciplined rhythm she recognized immediately. American military. The relief that flooded through her was quickly replaced by dread. If soldiers found her here, wounded and alone, it would blow her cover completely. Years of careful preparation would be destroyed in minutes. The voices grew closer. She could make out at least 4 distinct speakers, all male, all speaking in the clipped, efficient tones of special operations personnel. SEALs, by the sound of their tactical communications. "Building clear on the east side," one voice reported. "Copy that. We've got movement in the structure ahead. Could be civilian," another responded. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing. The pain in her side was getting worse, and she could feel herself starting to drift. Blood loss was making her thoughts fuzzy around the edges. She needed medical attention, but accepting help from these soldiers would mean answering questions she couldn't answer. The footsteps stopped just outside her hiding spot. "Ma'am? Are you injured?" The voice was gentle, but commanding. She looked up to see a figure in full combat gear. Night vision goggles pushed up on his helmet, assault rifle held in a non-threatening position. "I'm okay," she managed, though the words came out as barely more than a whisper. "No, you're not." The soldier knelt beside her, and she could see the concern in his eyes. "Jackson, get the medic over here now." "Really, I'm fine. I just need to—" Sarah tried to sit up straighter, but the movement sent fresh waves of agony through her torso. "Easy there. You're losing blood." The soldier's voice was kind, but firm. "What's your name?" This was the question she'd been dreading. Her cover identity had documents, backstory, everything needed to pass casual inspection. But these weren't casual circumstances. "Jennifer Walsh," she said, using the name on her fake passport. "I'm with the State Department. Communications specialist." The soldier nodded, but she could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was trained to notice details, and something about her story wasn't adding up. A State Department communications specialist wouldn't normally be alone in a combat zone without security. "Well, Jennifer, I'm Petty Officer Rodriguez. My team and I are going to get you out of here. But first, we need to take a look at that wound. Other members of his squad materialized from the shadows. Sarah counted 6 men total, all moving with the silent efficiency that marked them as elite special operations. They formed a protective perimeter while Rodriguez continued to assess her condition. "Where's your security detail?" another SEAL asked. "State Department personnel don't usually travel solo in areas like this." There was an explosion. I got separated." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. The medic arrived, a compact man with steady hands and alert eyes. "What do we have?" "Shrapnel wound to the torso. Possible internal bleeding," Rodriguez reported. As the medic began his examination, Sarah found herself studying the faces around her. These men had seen combat, had been trained to remain calm under pressure. But there was something in their expressions that she couldn't quite read. Suspicion? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? "We need to get her back to base," the medic said after a few minutes. "This isn't something I can treat in the field." "No," Sarah said quickly. "I can't go to a military facility. My department has protocols. I need to contact my supervisor first." The SEALs exchanged glances. In their world, protocols were important, but saving lives came first. The medic was already preparing his equipment, laying out supplies with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, with respect, you're in no condition to make that call," Rodriguez said. "We're going to stabilize you here, then get you to proper medical care." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her. Every instinct told her to maintain her cover, to stick to the story she'd memorized and practiced. But the pain was getting worse, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with each heartbeat. The medic's hands were gentle but thorough as he examined the wound. She bit back a cry as he probed the area around the shrapnel. His touch was professional, clinical, but she could sense his growing concern. "Rodriguez, we need to move her now," the medic said, his voice taking on an urgent edge. "This is worse than I thought." As they prepared to transport her, Sarah caught fragments of radio chatter from their communications. References to grid coordinates, extraction timelines, medical priorities. The language was familiar, the procedures exactly what she would have expected from a SEAL team operating in hostile territory. But there was something else in their voices now, a tension that hadn't been there before. She realized that her presence had complicated their mission. They couldn't just leave an injured American civilian, but they also couldn't compromise their operational security. The medic was working quickly now, establishing an IV line and applying pressure dressings to slow the bleeding. His movements were sure and practiced, the result of treating wounded teammates under fire. But as he worked, she noticed him frowning, as if something didn't make sense. "How long have you been in country?" he asked casually while adjusting the bandage. "About 2 weeks," Sarah replied, sticking to her cover story. "First deployment to this region?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. The medic's questions seemed innocent enough, but she could sense there was more behind them. He was trained to observe, to notice details that others might miss. As they prepared to move her to the extraction point, Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. She needed their help to survive, but accepting that help meant risking everything she'd worked for. The classified program she was part of depended on absolute secrecy. If her true identity was discovered, it wouldn't just end her career, it could compromise ongoing operations and put other operatives at risk. But as the pain intensified and her vision began to blur around the edges, she realized that maintaining her cover might not matter if she didn't survive the night. The choice was being taken out of her hands, one labored breath at a time. The medic finished his field treatment and looked up at Rodriguez. "We need to move. Now." As they lifted her onto a makeshift stretcher, Sarah caught a glimpse of the medic's face in the moonlight. There was something in his expression, not suspicion exactly, but a kind of knowing look that made her stomach clench with dread. Had he seen something during his examination that contradicted her cover story? The journey to the extraction point passed in a haze of pain and whispered tactical communications. The SEALs moved like ghosts through the hostile terrain, taking routes that avoided known enemy positions. Their professionalism was absolute, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating from the team. Her presence had turned what should have been a straightforward operation into something much more complicated. As they reached the landing zone where a helicopter waited with rotors turning, Sarah realized that her carefully constructed cover story was about to face its greatest test. Military medical facilities meant military personnel, all trained to notice details that civilians might miss. And if the medic had already spotted something that didn't add up, how long would it be before someone started asking the right questions? The rotor wash from the helicopter whipped sand and debris around them as they approached. The aircraft was a Black Hawk, configured for medical evacuation, with a full surgical team waiting inside. As they loaded her onto the aircraft, Sarah caught sight of the crew chief's face. He was looking at her with the same expression she'd seen on the medic's face. Professional concern mixed with something else. As the helicopter lifted off into the night sky, banking away from the combat zone, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. She'd been trained for interrogation, for maintaining cover under pressure, for resisting attempts to break her story. But she'd never been trained for this, trying to maintain a lie while depending on the very people she was lying to for her life. The medic leaned over her, checking her vital signs and adjusting the IV drip. In the red light of the helicopter's interior, his face was unreadable. But when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her blood run cold. "Don't worry," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Your secret's safe. For now." The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Wolverine, with a controlled crash that sent jolts of agony through Sarah's injured side. Through the haze of pain medication, she could hear the organized chaos of a trauma response team mobilizing. Voices called out medical terminology, feet pounded on metal decking, and equipment rolled across the landing pad with military precision. As they transferred her from the helicopter to a gurney, Sarah caught glimpses of faces in the harsh floodlights. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, all wearing the focused expressions of people who dealt with life and death on a daily basis. But underlying their professional demeanor, she sensed something else. Word had already spread about the mysterious civilian found alone in a combat zone. The base medical facility was surprisingly sophisticated for a forward position. Clean white walls, modern equipment, the antiseptic smell that was universal to hospitals everywhere. As they wheeled her through the corridors, Sarah tried to catalog every detail, every face, every potential exit route. Even injured and dependent on others for survival, her training wouldn't let her completely relax her guard. Dr. Amanda Torres was waiting in the trauma bay, a woman in her 40s with steady hands and penetrating dark eyes. She'd been the chief medical officer at Wolverine for 8 months, long enough to see every kind of injury the desert could produce. But as she looked down at Sarah on the gurney, something in her expression suggested this case was different. "Talk to me, Petty Officer Rodriguez," Dr. Torres said as the SEAL team leader provided a quick briefing. "Found her in Sector 7, injured and alone. Says she's State Department communications specialist. No security detail, no transportation, no explanation for how she ended up in an active combat zone." Dr. Torres nodded, her expression neutral. "And the wound?" "Shrapnel from an explosion. The medic thinks there might be internal bleeding." As the medical team began their work, Sarah found herself under intense scrutiny, not just from the doctors treating her injury, but from the growing number of personnel who seemed to find reasons to pass by the trauma bay. Word was spreading through the base that they had a mystery on their hands. The examination was thorough and professional. X-rays revealed the shrapnel fragment lodged near her ribs, close enough to major organs to be dangerous, but not immediately life-threatening. Dr. Torres worked with calm efficiency, but Sarah could sense the doctor's mind working on more than just medical problems. "Ms. Walsh," Dr. Torres said during a break in the procedure, "I need to ask you some questions for our records. Standard protocol for treating civilian personnel." Sarah nodded, though her mouth felt dry with apprehension. "How long have you been working in this region?" "About 2 weeks." The same answer she'd given the medic. "And your specific duties with the State Department?" "Establishing secure communication networks for diplomatic facilities." The cover story flowed smoothly, the result of hours of practice and preparation. Dr. Torres made notes on her tablet, but her eyes never left Sarah's face. "That's interesting work. Requires specialized training, I imagine." "Some technical background, yes." "Military experience?" The question hung in the air like a landmine. Sarah had been dreading this moment since the helicopter lifted off. Her cover identity had no military service, but her body told a different story. Scars from training accidents, muscle memory that kicked in under stress, conditioning that civilian life couldn't explain. "No military experience," she said, meeting Dr. Torres's gaze steadily. The doctor nodded and made another note. But Sarah caught the subtle exchange of glances between Dr. Torres and the nurse assisting her. They'd seen something during the examination that didn't match her story. Over the next several hours, as Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness under the influence of pain medication, she became aware of increased activity around her bed. Personnel who didn't seem to have any medical reason for being there kept finding excuses to check on her. The base intelligence officer made an appearance, asking polite questions about her work and how she'd ended up injured. A representative from the base commander's office stopped by to express concern for her welfare. Each conversation was friendly and professional, but Sarah could read the subtext. They knew something was wrong with her story, and they were trying to figure out what. The turning point came on her second day at the base. Dr. Torres was changing her dressings when she paused, studying something on Sarah's shoulder. It was a small scar, barely visible, the kind that most people would dismiss as a childhood injury. But Dr. Torres had seen enough military personnel to recognize the distinctive mark left by a particular type of injection, the same injection given to special operations personnel before deployment to certain regions. "That's an interesting scar," Dr. Torres said casually. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The vaccination scar was something she'd completely forgotten about, a detail that hadn't seemed important when her cover was being constructed. But to a military doctor with years of experience, it was like a fingerprint. "Childhood injury," Sarah said, but she could hear the strain in her own voice. Dr. Torres didn't respond immediately. She finished changing the dressing in silence, her movements careful and deliberate. But when she was done, she sat down in the chair beside Sarah's bed. "Ms. Walsh, I think we need to have an honest conversation." The word sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She'd been trained for interrogation, but this wasn't an interrogation. This was something worse. A doctor who cared about her patients trying to understand why one of them was lying. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean that nothing about your story makes sense. State Department communications specialists don't travel alone in active combat zones. They don't have vaccination scars consistent with special operations deployment protocols. They don't have the kind of conditioning I can feel in your muscle tone or the instinctive responses you've shown during examination." Sarah remained silent, her mind racing through options. Stick to the cover story and hope they eventually accepted it? Try to bluff her way out? Or take the biggest risk of all and trust these people with something closer to the truth? "More importantly," Dr. Torres continued, "they don't have the kind of classified tracking device I found embedded under the skin of your arm." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The tracking device was so small, so carefully hidden, that she'd never considered the possibility of it being discovered during routine medical treatment. It was designed to be undetectable by standard equipment, but military medical facilities had scanners that went far beyond standard. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said weakly, but they both knew the pretense was over. Dr. Torres leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't know who you really are, and frankly, I don't want to know. What I do know is that you're injured. You're in my care, and someone is going to start asking very hard questions very soon." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come from Washington when unidentified tracking devices show up on base medical scans. The kind that involve people with security clearances higher than mine taking a very close look at your situation." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her collapsing cover settling on her chest like a stone. Everything she'd worked for, everything her mission was supposed to accomplish, was falling apart because of a piece of shrapnel and a doctor who was too good at her job. "How long do I have?" she asked. "Maybe 12 hours before the inquiries start coming through official channels. Maybe less." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Sarah found herself at a crossroads that her training had never prepared her for. She could continue to maintain her cover and hope that her handlers could extract her before her true identity was discovered. Or she could trust the people who had saved her life with enough truth to navigate the crisis that was coming. "Dr. Torres," she said finally, "if I told you that I can't explain who I am or why I'm here, but that I'm one of the good guys, would that be enough?" The doctor studied her for a long moment. "Honestly? No. Not with the heat this is going to bring down on all of us, but it might be a start." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the door. Petty Officer Rodriguez entered, his expression grim. "Doc, we've got a problem. Base Command just got a call from CENTCOM. They want to know everything about our civilian guest, and they want it yesterday." Dr. Torres and Rodriguez exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They were all caught in something bigger than a routine medical case now. "There's more," Rodriguez continued. "The medic who treated her in the field, he's been asking questions. Says something didn't add up about her injuries." Sarah felt her heart sink. The medic who had hinted that he knew her secret was apparently not content to let sleeping dogs lie. "What kind of questions?" Dr. Torres asked. "Technical stuff about wound patterns and blood loss, but also questions about her behavior under stress. Says she responded to tactical situations like someone with combat training." The noose was tightening from multiple directions. Sarah realized that her only chance now was to get word to her handlers before the military investigation gained momentum. But her secure communication methods required equipment she didn't have, and access she couldn't get without blowing her cover completely. "I need to make a phone call," she said. Rodriguez shook his head. "All communication off base requires approval through the chain of command, and given the circumstances, I don't think that approval is coming anytime soon." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think. Her extraction protocols included emergency procedures, but they were designed for situations where she had at least some operational freedom. Being a patient in a military medical facility while under investigation was not a scenario anyone had planned for. "There is one thing," Dr. Torres said slowly. "The medical evacuation flight leaves for Germany tomorrow morning. Routine transfer for patients who need advanced treatment. If your condition required that level of care—" "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that once you're in the German medical system, the paperwork gets a lot more complicated. Might buy you some time to figure out your next move." It was a lifeline, but a dangerous one. Accepting the medical evacuation would mean leaving the country under false pretenses, potentially creating an international incident if her true identity was ever discovered. But staying meant facing a military investigation that would inevitably uncover the truth. As if reading her thoughts, Rodriguez spoke up. "Ma'am, I don't know what your story really is, but I know you're not what you claim to be. That said, my team and I didn't risk our necks pulling you out of that combat zone just to watch you disappear into some black hole interrogation room. The unexpected support from the SEAL who had rescued her was both touching and terrifying. It meant that whatever happened next, these people would be implicated in her deception. The thought of dragging them down with her was almost worse than the prospect of capture. "I can't ask you to do that," she said. "You're not asking," Dr. Torres replied. "We're offering. But we need to know that we're doing the right thing here." Sarah looked at their faces and saw something she hadn't expected. Trust. Despite all the inconsistencies in her story, despite the evidence that she wasn't who she claimed to be, these people were willing to help her. The question was whether she could trust them in return. "If I tell you that people's lives depend on my mission staying secret, would you believe me?" "Yes," Rodriguez said immediately. "The question is, how many lives are we talking about, and what happens if we get this wrong?" Before Sarah could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the medical facility. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red, and she could hear the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed. The vehicles that screeched to a halt outside the medical facility weren't ordinary military transport. Sarah recognized the sound of armored SUVs, the kind used by intelligence agencies and Special Operations Command. Through the small window of her room, she caught glimpses of figures in civilian clothes moving with military precision toward the building entrance. Dr. Torres moved quickly to the window and peered through the blinds. "That's not CENTCOM," she said grimly. "Those are spooks." Rodriguez was already on his radio, speaking in the clipped tones reserved for emergency situations. "Base security? This is Rodriguez. What's the status on those vehicles?" The response crackled through the speaker. "Unknown authorization. They're claiming federal authority and demanding access to the medical facility." Sarah felt her world collapsing around her. Whatever agency was arriving, they weren't here for a routine inquiry. Someone had put pieces together faster than anyone had anticipated, and now her carefully constructed mission was about to become a diplomatic nightmare. "I need to tell you something," she said urgently. "Both of you. Right now." Dr. Torres and Rodriguez turned to her, their faces tense with anticipation. "My name isn't Jennifer Walsh. I can't tell you my real name, but I can tell you that I work for a classified program that tracks high-value targets across multiple countries. 3 months ago, we identified a terrorist cell planning an attack on American military installations in this region." The words came out in a rush. Years of careful operational security crumbling under the pressure of immediate crisis. The mission was to get close enough to their leadership to plant surveillance devices. The cover story was solid, the paperwork was perfect, and everything was going according to plan until that explosion. I wasn't supposed to get injured. I wasn't supposed to need rescue, and I definitely wasn't supposed to end up in a military medical facility where people might notice things that don't add up. Rodriguez processed this information with the cool efficiency of someone accustomed to classified briefings. "What kind of attack are we talking about? Chemical weapons? Stolen from Syrian stockpiles during the chaos there. The intelligence suggests they're planning to hit multiple bases simultaneously during a major operation." Dr. Torres paled. "When?" "We don't know. That's what I was trying to find out when everything went wrong." The sound of boots in the corridor grew louder. Whoever was coming for her was moving fast, and apparently wasn't bothering with standard military protocols for visiting medical facilities. "How many people are involved in this terrorist cell?" Rodriguez asked. "At least 30 that we know of. But the real concern is their sponsor. We have evidence suggesting they're being funded and equipped by a state actor, someone with access to military-grade weapons and intelligence." Rodriguez and Dr. Torres exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The revelation changed everything about Sarah's situation. If she was telling the truth, her mission wasn't just about catching terrorists. It was about preventing a potential catastrophe that could kill hundreds of American military personnel. "The people coming for me now," Sarah continued, "they're not from my program. Someone else has gotten wind of the situation, and they're going to want answers I can't give them without compromising ongoing operations." Dr. Torres moved to the door and locked it, a gesture that was more symbolic than practical, but somehow reassuring. "What do you need from us?" "Time. My handlers don't know what's happened to me. They're probably assuming I'm dead or captured by now. If I can get a message to them, they can extract me and the mission can continue." "And if you can't?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on her chest. "Then a lot of good people are going to die, and the terrorists responsible will disappear back into whatever hole they crawled out of." Rodriguez was already moving, his training taking over. "Doc, how long does she need to be medically stable for transport? If we're talking emergency evacuation, 20 minutes to prep her for movement. And how long before whoever's outside gets tired of waiting and decides to come in whether we like it or not?" As if in answer to his question, there was a sharp knock on the medical facility's main entrance, followed by voices demanding immediate access. "Not long enough," Dr. Torres said grimly. Rodriguez keyed his radio again. "This is Rodriguez. I need all available team members to report to medical facility. Full gear, on the double." "Rodriguez, what are you doing?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I'm buying you time to save American lives. Doc, get her ready to move." The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Dr. Torres worked with impressive efficiency, adjusting Sarah's IV lines and medications to prepare her for transport. Rodriguez coordinated with his team members, setting up what appeared to be a standard security perimeter around the medical facility. But Sarah could hear the tension in their voices. They were preparing to defy federal authority on the word of a woman they'd known for less than 48 hours, a woman who had already admitted to lying about her identity. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Rodriguez as he helped Dr. Torres prepare her for movement. "Because I've seen what chemical weapons do to people," he replied simply. "And because sometimes you have to trust your gut about who the good guys are." Through the window, Sarah could see more vehicles arriving. The situation was escalating rapidly, and she realized that her rescuers were about to find themselves in serious trouble because of her. "There's another option," she said suddenly. "I'm listening," Rodriguez replied. "The tracking device Dr. Torres found. It's not just a tracker. It's an emergency communication beacon. If you can activate it, my handlers will know my location and status within minutes." Dr. Torres frowned. "Activate it how?" "It's embedded under your skin, and I don't have surgical facilities here to remove it safely." "You don't need to remove it. You just need to apply electrical current to the surrounding tissue. A defibrillator should do it." Rodriguez stared at her. "You want us to shock you?" "I want you to send a signal that will bring people who can get me out of here before this situation gets any worse." Dr. Torres was already shaking her head. "That's incredibly dangerous. The electrical current could affect your heart rhythm, especially given your current condition. As opposed to being captured and tortured for information that could compromise ongoing operations and get a lot of people killed." The argument was interrupted by louder voices from the building entrance. The federal agents were getting impatient, and base security wasn't going to be able to stall them much longer. "Do it," Rodriguez said decisively. Dr. Torres hesitated for another moment, then began preparing the defibrillator equipment. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Everything hurts right now," Sarah replied. The defibrillator pads were positioned carefully over the area where the tracking device was embedded. Dr. Torres checked the settings twice, then looked at Rodriguez and Sarah. "Ready?" Sarah nodded, bracing herself for the shock. The electrical current hit her like a lightning bolt, every muscle in her body contracting simultaneously. Pain exploded through her chest and arms, and for a moment she thought her heart might actually stop. Then it was over, leaving her gasping and disoriented but conscious. "Did it work?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah concentrated, trying to feel for any change in the device. "I think so. If the signal got through, we should see results within 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes stretched like hours. Outside, the confrontation between federal agents and base security was escalating. Sarah could hear raised voices, demands for immediate access, and the kinds of legal threats that suggested someone was prepared to go very high up the chain of command to get what they wanted. Rodriguez's team had taken defensive positions around the medical facility, not pointing weapons at anyone but making it clear that they weren't going to stand aside easily. It was a delicate balance, showing resolve without actually engaging in a firefight with federal agents. "Rodriguez," Dr. Torres said quietly, "if this doesn't work, you and your team are going to be facing court-martial proceedings." "If it does work, a lot of people stay alive," he replied. "I can live with those odds." 8 minutes after the defibrillator shock, Sarah heard a sound that made her heart leap with relief. Helicopter rotors approaching fast from the south. Not the heavy transport helicopters used by the military, but the lighter, faster aircraft preferred by intelligence agencies. "That's them," she said. Rodriguez moved to the window and peered out. 3 helicopters coming in hot, and they don't look like they're planning to ask permission to land. The helicopters set down in the open area behind the medical facility, disgorging teams of operatives in unmarked tactical gear. Sarah recognized the deployment pattern immediately. Her extraction team had arrived in force. The standoff outside the building suddenly became much more complicated. Federal agents found themselves facing not just a handful of SEALs, but professional operators who clearly outranked them in the intelligence community hierarchy. Sarah's handler, a man she knew only as Control, appeared in her doorway within minutes. He was a gray-haired figure in civilian clothes who looked like he could have been an accountant, but Sarah had seen him coordinate operations across 3 continents. "Agent Chen," he said formally, using her real designation for the first time in months. "We need to move, now." "What about them?" Sarah indicated Rodriguez and Dr. Torres. "They saved my life and protected my cover. They're going to face serious consequences for this." Control studied the 2 military personnel with the calculating gaze of someone who spent his life managing assets and liabilities. "Petty Officer Rodriguez, Dr. Torres, you're both coming with us." "Sir?" Rodriguez looked confused. "The operation Agent Chen was conducting just broke wide open. We need everyone who has operational knowledge of the situation isolated and debriefed immediately. You're both being temporarily assigned to a classified task force." It was a lifeline Sarah hadn't dared hope for. Instead of facing court-martial for helping her, Rodriguez and Dr. Torres were being brought into the fold, their knowledge and skills adding to the operation instead of threatening it. As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt compelled to address the risks her rescuers had taken. "You didn't have to do this," she told them. "Either of you. You could have followed regulations and let the federal agents handle everything." Dr. Torres smiled grimly. "Sometimes medical ethics trumps military regulations. First, do no harm includes not letting patients get disappeared into black holes." Rodriguez nodded agreement. "Besides, SEALs don't abandon people who are fighting the same fight we are." The extraction itself was swift and professional. Within 20 minutes of Control's arrival, Sarah found herself on a helicopter heading toward a secure facility where she could receive proper medical treatment and resume coordination of the terrorist threat. But as the landscape scrolled beneath them, she realized that the mission had fundamentally changed. What had started as a solo infiltration operation had become something larger, involving more personnel and higher stakes than originally planned. "Control," she said through the helicopter's communication system, "what's our operational status?" "The intelligence you gathered before your injury was enough to identify 3 of the target locations," he replied. We've been tracking the terrorist cell's communications since your beacon activated. They know something went wrong with their ambush, but they don't know how much we've learned. Are they accelerating their timeline? We believe so, which means we have perhaps 72 hours to prevent multiple coordinated attacks on American installations. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. The mission wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But at least now, she wouldn't be facing it alone. What about Rodriguez and Dr. Torres? They're both qualified for temporary security clearances. Rodriguez's combat experience and Dr. Torres's medical expertise could be valuable for what we're planning. As the helicopter flew through the night sky, carrying them toward an uncertain but crucial battle against terrorism, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that had brought them all together. A routine mission had become a disaster, which had become a rescue, which had become something approaching hope. She'd entered the field as a single operative with a narrow mission. She was returning as part of a team that included a SEAL who valued honor over regulations and a doctor who put patient welfare above bureaucratic convenience. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sometimes the best operations were the ones that went completely wrong, forcing improvisation and trust that couldn't be planned or scripted. And sometimes the people you least expected to save the day were the ones who showed up when everything else fell apart. The helicopter banked toward their destination, carrying 4 people whose lives had become intertwined by chance, necessity, and the simple human decision to do what seemed right regardless of the consequences. Behind them, the desert stretched endlessly under a carpet of stars, hiding secrets that could change the course of history. In 72 hours, they would all learn whether their improvised alliance was strong enough to prevent catastrophe. But for now, flying through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Sarah Chen allowed herself to believe that sometimes the most important battles were won not by perfect planning, but by imperfect people making difficult choices when everything was on the line.